just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your dog life journey.
Sure. My name is Noelle Herren, and I am from Indiana. I run Silver Ridge Gamprs and Silver Ridge Farms, and we have been raising Gamprs for probably about, I want to say maybe 7 years or so. We began in the Gampr world originally because we were needing another dog to replace a dog that was aging. And we did probably about 3 years of research before we landed upon the Armenian Gampr or Gampr, depending upon where you're from. Mm-hmm. And we found them, and they just fit the bill for every single category that we needed. We needed something that was going to be good with kids. We needed something that was going to be a formidable deterrent for the huge number of coyote packs that we had out in our area, and we needed something that would be flexible for our lifestyle.
Right. And could you tell us about the breed and a little history on them?
Sure. The Gampr is one of the oldest breeds that history records. There's accounts way even before biblical times of this breed, and actually this breed is considered a land race, so that kind of differs from the typical maybe verbiage that we use for other breeds. It's because of its land race nature, it allows for a greater genetic variation, which also includes health, longevity, and hardiness within the breed. But because of that location, it pulls in from all different sorts of cultures in the Caucasus Mountain type region, which includes Armenian, Turkey. Many of the breeds that we see today, of the livestock guardian breeds, originated with the Gampr. We see breeds like the Kangal, the Akbash, the Anatolian Shepherd, even some of the breeds that are Russian in orientation have originated and gotten their starts from the Gampr. A lot of this is due in part to the occupations and seizures that have happened in that region, both by the Ottoman Empire and even by the Russians. And when the Turkish people, or when the Armenian people have been taken over, their best dogs and some of the great dogs have been taken over, or at least their perceived best dogs have been taken over as kind of conquests of war to those areas. And those are how some of the other breeds have started.
Interesting.
So we chose this breed in huge part because of their ability to be with children. We had Great Pyrenees before this, and we actually had two before this. One that we loved and was awesome, and one that had some of the typical problems that you hear maybe with a typical Great Pyrenees nowadays, with issues of wandering, and they don't want to stay home, they don't want to stay in fence lines, and those things. But we needed a dog that was going to stay home, was going to be great with the kids. At the time we had 6 children, ranging in age, I think, from, I would say at the time, maybe about 11 or 12 down to about 4. And so we had young kids. We needed a dog that had the ability to take out a huge predator or to take out huge packs of predators. We have livestock, and so we need them for that purpose. But at the same time, to be able to have that duplicity of being able to be gentle and soft with our children. Because nobody wants an animal that can hurt anybody in their family. So that was one of the biggest reasons that we chose this breed. Oh. I was just going to say they have a formidable nature that is much higher than, like, say, you would see in a Great Pyrenees. There's some great Pyrenees out there, but they don't have the same presence that these dogs do. These dogs are not going to let strange animals, albeit dogs or wild dogs, coyotes, bears, wolves, mountain lions onto the property, but in the same way, they also won't allow strangers to come onto your property.
And what is their typical size range that you've experienced?
Oh, that's a great question. There's a huge size variance in this dog, and I think that goes back to the landrace nature of the breed. There are dogs that originate from the north and from the east and the west, and each of those dogs has a different size that's more typically associated with it. We see dogs typically from the north that have a little bit larger body mass. And so, the dogs that we see here in America can range anywhere from 90 to, I would say, about just shy maybe of 200 pounds, 180 pounds, something in that range. We tend to, on our farm, have the bigger dogs. It wasn't necessarily something we planned. We were so blessed in being able to have good dogs when we started, but we really didn't know what we were doing, and found out a whole bunch afterwards, and we're so happy that we had been helped along the way to make a good choice. So there's just that huge range of size in these dogs.
And have you noticed the difference in personality, say, between the males and the females?
I think it's more, I get asked that question quite frequently. I think it's more based on the specific animal than it is related to gender. I guess if I would have to say overall, now this doesn't always hold true, I would say that I think that the females tend to be a little bit bossier and more particular, and the males tend to be a little bit more laid back as far as relationships with each other. But as far as their ability to handle predators, there's absolutely no difference. I think sometimes people associate, the larger or slightly larger size of the males and think that they're going to be a more scary presence, or they're able to handle a predator better, but we haven't found that that's accurate.
And so, say if somebody had smaller dogs or a cat or two in the house, how would they socialize with them?
The Gampr has a amazing ability to associate what is normal and what belongs, and separate that from what is not normal and what doesn't belong. And so, for example, we have probably maybe 7 or 8 cats on our property, and our dogs don't chase our cats. We have rabbits on our property. The dogs don't chase the rabbits because we've told them that they've belonged. They've learned that they belonged. I know that people have had these dogs guard open clutches of rabbits, and they don't attack the rabbits. Same thing with the chickens and the poultry. But they know what belongs and what doesn't. Now, if a stray dog comes onto the property, then it doesn't belong there, the Gampr will warn a warning bark, which basically is intimidating, and hopefully the dog will leave. And if it doesn't, then the dog will do what it was meant to do, and it will take care of that threat so that it protects its home and its other animals. We've even been contacted, and we've met people that use these dogs to guard and protect other dogs, like smaller breeds of dogs from predators.
Wow.
And that works out wonderfully.
Wow. How many would you say are in the United States or North America right now?
Oh, at one point, not so long ago, I think we were around 500. So my guess is that we're probably in that 500, probably not exceeding the 1,000 mark range.
Wow.
So they're still very, very rare.
Right. You're probably one of a handful of breeders, huh?
We were. I think we were maybe one of the first breeders in the Midwest that we knew of at the time. We've just been so happy with this breed. We never intended to be breeders when we got our first dog.
Yeah.
We just wanted a guardian, and we did what they always say not to do, is fall in love with the breed and decide that your dogs are great and start breeding.
Yeah.
But it turned out that we really did have some awesome dogs, and they were totally worthy of being bred. And we've continued to import dogs from Armenia, and have had a lot of success doing that, especially through the club. It's important for people that want to import dogs from Armenia, as opposed to buying them in the United States, to contact the Armenian Gampr Club of America,
Mm-hmm.
so that they make sure that they're getting dogs that are, one, actually Gamprs, two, that they are able to be registered, and that we know their lineage on those dogs, because it's really hard to get that paperwork post-sale, whereas it's a little bit easier to get it pre-sale.
Mm-hmm. All right. And are they aren't registered through the FCI yet, are they?
No, they're registered right now through the Armenian Gampr Club of America. Many dogs, based upon their pedigree, are also eligible to be registered with the American Rare Breed Association.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, my dogs are, some of them are double registered, but they all have the capability of being double registered.
Okay. And how has that experience been with the American Rare Breed Association? Do they have shows and all that?
They do have shows, and typically the shows are more well attended by the people that live on the West Coast, and typically they're located in that area. So we have not gone to a show. It's not something that that we really probably at this point intend to do, though you just never know what the future holds with that in regards to that. But we have a full working farm.
Mm-hmm.
We also have 6 kids and a full plate via homeschooling and everything else. And so, that's just not logistically feasible for us at this point.
Right.
But, yeah. So, Gamprs are very, very vocal with their initial warning. You can hear, if you're close to the dog, you can hear that they see or feel something that doesn't belong. They will begin to kind of rumble in their chest, and then they may let out a few really high-pitched, sharp barks, and those are like their pre-warning barks, and then they will charge to the area that they hear the sound, maybe not fully to the area or wherever they see the issue going on. And the first line of defense is always the bark, and we as owners and always want our dogs to deploy the situation with as much vocal content as possible, so that they can avoid a confrontation physically if possible. Mm-hmm. And so that's always the goal. And so they'll bark, they'll run the fence lines, they'll snarl, they'll growl, they'll bark, and typically their bark is enough deterrent to make the predator leave. But if not, then they will chase that predator down. Oftentimes, we see in a good pack of dogs, a well-balanced pack of dogs, we see that there are 3 different size types of dogs in a pack, if you've balanced it well. You have really large dogs, and you only need 1 or 2 of those in a pack. And those dogs may appear lazy or listless. You may think, oh, why am I feeding this big dog? But they are big and bulky, and they are not necessarily the first to the fight. If they have to go chase off a predator, they're typically slower, but they are the ones that finish off the animal when they get there. Mm-hmm. Then you also have the thin, spry, muscular dogs that are quick runners, and those usually have the smallest body type, and so those are typically the ones that will meet the predator and start the dispatching process. And then you have a medium-sized dog who may or may not pursue with as much vigor the predator. Oftentimes we see that the packs instinctively divide up into groups. a group that charges the predator and a group that stays back and surrounds the livestock in kind of like a dual force effort. And so I'm not sure that totally answers the question, but we found that kind of is really a cool dance to see them do.
Right. Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, so there are basically two different functions that the Armenian Gampr serves in Armenia currently. And the first one is they are currently still being used like they've been used for thousands of years as shepherds, with the shepherds on the hillsides. There are sheep camps that the whole family of shepherds and their families typically pitch tents as they live a rather nomadic lifestyle, traveling from pasture land to pasture land. And the dogs live in and amongst the shepherds and the sheep as they travel back and forth. And that's kind of important because when we meet people that are wanting to learn about the breed and that are interested in getting a livestock guardian, we really say that there's kind of an old school methodology that when you get a livestock guardian, that you should throw it out into the pasture. You don't talk to it. You don't touch it any more than you need to. You want it to bond with the animals, and that the more physical interaction that you have with that dog, the less chance that they will bond with the animals. And what we found is that these dogs thrive on the relationship that they build with their shepherd. And so they walk in and amongst their families in these sheep camps, and they walk in and amongst the flocks of sheep, and they do it seamlessly. They aren't relegated to either being having a relationship with a person or having a relationship with their livestock. They are fully capable of doing both. And so that's really cool. So we really tell people that's super, super important to do that. And so when we send puppies home, we say, it's okay if you take a week or two and you bring that dog inside and you love that new dog and you bond to that puppy and you let him learn that he can trust you and you can trust him. And then you can take him back out to the pasture and start training him. Because he's already been in the pasture for 8, 10, 12, 14 weeks, however long he's been here. He needs to know you, and he needs to know that he can trust you so that you can have a working relationship going forward. But the secondary use that they have in Armenia currently is for fighting. And that is not something that we as a club here in America endorse. It's something that we really try hard to avoid. The fighting dogs are not true Armenian Gamprs arguably in nature, because the fighting dogs have been basically become a mixed breed between the Armenian Gampr and other dogs from other nations to make them more fierce. Specifically, we see some mixing with Russia and some of the other areas with the Russian dogs. And so what we see is that the dogs that are in that fighting circle are not dogs that we typically, at all, we do not want to import those dogs to America. We want to import the shepherd dogs, the sheep camp dogs. We want to have those dogs be part of the gene pool that we work for here in America. The Armenian Gampr Club of America, their focus is on breed preservation. And so by choosing very carefully what dogs we import, we have a better chance of preservation worldwide.
Right.
So I guess the best way to say it is to start off is that because it isn't a specific breed, it is a landrace, they don't really have a specific breed standard. There are some things that we specifically want to avoid when we breed dogs. Specifically, we don't want any blue eyes on dogs. We don't want any merle totes. We also want to be... When I think about what I want in a dog, I divide it into 3 categories. I divide it into physical, temperament, and their working ability. And so physically, we want them to have, a dark nose with dark rimmed eyes. We also want them to have a long body with a straight back. We want their legs to be angular and flexible. We want to avoid cowhocking and flaying of toes. So some of those basic things that you see in most breeds, and physically, we want them to have kind of a body that in the rear is kind of balanced out in the front, so that the dog is not working harder than it needs to be working. For me, the biggest area that I breed for, well, I think physical composition is really important, and I think working ability is important. I think temperament is the most important thing, and that's kind of what I breed for most of all. I try to match my temperament of each puppy with their potential job and their potential owners. So we do a lot of pre-screening ahead of time with people that want to have puppies placed with them. They'll tell me things like, okay, I have a large ranch in the western United States or the Pacific Northwest, and I have maybe 100 acres, it's open field, I have maybe whatever. And so they'll tell me what they have. Or somebody may come to me and say, I live in the Midwest and I have a 5-acre homestead. Well, the type of dog that I place on a 5-acre homestead, temperament-wise, is going to be different than the dog that I place on a 100-acre ranch or plus. But I also think that there's a temperament standard that runs throughout the whole thing. We don't want a dog that is going to be guardy or aggressive with children in any way. If a dog is aggressive with children, which I've never personally seen one like that, then that dog would not be a good candidate for breeding purposes. And we would put that dog just into a situation that wasn't an option. And so that's kind of like, for me, the main thing. And then when we're talking about their working abilities, we want them to be good with stock. Though we need to remember, I think sometimes people get a dog and they think, oh, I have this puppy, and this puppy may be, for example, we had pups with our last litter that we had this past fall. By 4 months, were 60 and 70 pounds. So they will see a 60 or 70 pound dog, and they think, oh, this dog's capable of doing an adult-sized job because they appear to be an adult-sized dog. But in reality, they're only 4 or 5 months old, and they're still babies. And so we just have to keep our mind kind of in that mindset that they still have growing to do. In the whole livestock guardian world, the rule of thumb is that no livestock guardian is typically reliable before 2 years of age, though there are exceptions, and oftentimes we find exceptions. But if you keep in mind that you have the plan that they're not going to be reliable until they're 2, and they do great at 4 months or 8 months or 12 months, then you're just pleasantly surprised. So that's kind of what we tell people to do, is have a plan in mind for the next couple months or for the next couple years of how you're going to continue this training, because they take 3 years to fully grow. So they'll continue to grow for 3 years. And so we want them to never be scared or back away from a situation. And also remember that being with poultry can sometimes take longer because they're like floppy little squeaky toys that typically, yes. So typically those can be triggers for some dogs, and so they all get it. It's just sometimes it takes a little bit more time with the poultry than it does with, say, a goat or a sheep or something like that. We do. We're pretty picky on who we accept for our clients, just because we want the dog to have a good life. And so these dogs can be used for any number of purposes. Predominantly, they're used as livestock guardians. In the origination of the dog, they were used in Armenia for search and rescue dogs. They were kind of like considered avalanche dogs, so they would go search and rescue for people that were lost. And they've also been used as companion dogs. So they can be trained to another job, but they must have a job, whether that's to guard their home, to guard their family. They are not a good candidate for living in an apartment. They're not a good candidate for living in a home that doesn't have some type of like physical boundary. Like typically a fence is what we see. We've seen some people use electric fence, or not electric fencing, the underground fencing, and that's worked okay. But really, the best fencing is a visual fence that they can see. They don't typically challenge fencing too much, but they need that visual representation of this is my home, and that this belongs to me, and that outside of the fence is not mine to guard, and that helps them be very content. So they need a job. They also need somebody that's going to be able to be with them and be consistent about their feeding and their training. And I would say, like, location as far as temperature is a non-negotiable. They're very, very flexible about the temperature that they can endure. They do great. Here in Indiana, we can go, into the hundreds in the summer, and we can also go into the negative 30s plus in the winter. So, and they do great. They tend to really love the winter time the most, but we've placed dogs in Florida and the rest of the South without any problems as well. So typically it's more about the house location and job. So if you have a house in a yard, that's much better than, not having that, and also making sure that they have a job to do so that they feel fulfilled.
Right, absolutely.
I was just saying to somebody just today that I feel like I learned something new every single litter. I did not grow up with dogs, and so this is a really, really, this is a whole new journey for me. I was not, I did not even grow up on a farm, or I grew up a very suburban lifestyle, so it was kind of like starting from scratch. So, I would say that I learned something every time, typically about people, how to listen to people and listen to what they're saying and what they're not saying, as far as what they need in the dog. I've learned how to match dogs better. Every litter is better and better, and I've learned how to train these dogs. I didn't even know really how to train a dog when I started this all those years ago. So a huge part of what we see in the Gampr is that they just have a lot of instinct. They're super, super smart. But there is a portion that we train, and it's I've always said that dog training is a lot, in my opinion, like raising children. It's that consistency. If you can be consistent, then they get everything so much faster, and it's just easier all the way around. So I think that those are the things that I've probably learned the most. Every litter I meet new people that become like close friends to us. We call them our Silver Ridge family, and it really is kind of like that. We just, the people that we meet, we stay in contact with oftentimes, and I'll have, people will often say on mine, I see here and there, people say, oh, is your dog from Silver Ridge? Because it looks like my dog, and my dog's from Silver Ridge. And then they find each other and they communicate, well, my dog's doing this, and my dog's doing this. And then they kind of find each other and become friends with each other too, which is really fulfilling too.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Can you talk about some of your favorite breeds besides the Gampr?
I was kind of thinking about that. Because I don't have a whole bunch of experience with other breeds, I've got to say that I'm really sold out on these guys.
Right.
We when I was in high school, when I was just about ready to leave the house for college, we did end up getting a beagle. And so, and then I ended up marrying my husband, whose father raised beagles for field trials. So most of my experiences with the beagles or with the Great Pyrenees, like we had those guys, and I love our Great Pyrenees that we had, that was just a keeper. He lived outside as a guardian for 14 years, and that was amazing. And we've had maybe a dog here or there in my married life that was like an adopted dog. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say that I have a whole bunch of experience with other dogs. These just have been my dog, and I'm kind of sold out on it.
Right.
And yeah.
Can you talk about like what your morning and evening routine is with your dogs, especially
Sure.
when you're expecting a litter or have a litter?
Absolutely, yeah. So we spent individual and group time with every single dog about 3 times a day, and then we're typically out with them even more often than that. Especially when we have litters on the ground. So each dog has their individual relationship with us, and then they have a relationship with us in a group. And so we make sure that, especially in that group time, where we're not only dealing with the dogs, but we're also out in the pastures walking and touching the goats and the other livestock, so that they can see our relationship also with the livestock. And by seeing us touch and rub on the backs or the heads of another animal, they see that we own that animal and that's our animal. And then because they have a relationship, that dog has a relationship with us, they also want to keep that animal safe and build a relationship with that animal. Mm-hmm. So we try to focus on that. I've always thought that the more connected that you are to your animal, the more they are willing to do what you ask of them. These dogs are very independent thinkers, and they absolutely know that you cannot make them do anything that they don't want to do. They are strong-willed dogs, and they are independent. But with that being said, my dogs come when I call them. They sit when I tell them to sit. And it's not because they have to. It's because they want to. It's because they have built a relationship with me, and I have built a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of a very beautiful thing when it all works out like that. Mm-hmm. So in the mornings, we go out and we feed all of the animals. We milk our goats. We spend time one-on-one with them. That happens even before we eat our own breakfast. The most active times for these dogs are morning and evening, so at dawn and dusk. And then they lay around a lot through the middle of the day, especially if it's warm. Mm-hmm. So we try really hard to be out at that dawn and dusk time and catch them when they're active. So, and then we go out in the middle of the day, we check water, we check feed multiple times a day. We typically free feed, and that doesn't necessarily work well for everybody, but it works well for us, and we like that. So we just constantly check to make sure that there's food in their serving areas. And when we have a litter on the ground, it also means that we're out there training. I'm a firm believer that if you want to train an animal, that a quick and instant correction is going to make the quickest turnaround. And it's much better than letting them do it 5 times while you've been away from the pasture for 5 hours, and then you come back in on the 6th time, you've corrected it. So we literally divide the kids up and me up, and we're out there hours and hours every day when we have litters on the ground. And that doesn't mean the mom's not correcting them, the siblings aren't correcting them, the other senior dogs aren't correcting them. They're all doing that too. But we're building that relationship so that when they go to their new home, if they don't have a senior dog, that they can receive direction very clearly and quickly from their new owner. Mm-hmm. So that's part of our day too. And so most of that happens morning and evening.
Right.
Yeah.
And could you talk about how they react around kids, say from, baby to 11, 12 years old?
Yeah, sure. They are, I wish I knew a better word, but they're just amazing with children. One of my favorite stories that I like to tell people is that when when my children were little, that if they would ride bikes around, as early beginning riders at 5 or 6 or whatever, they're going to fall down, they're going to skin their knees, and of course, what the little kids do, they start screaming and crying. And my dogs, every single time that would happen, they would run for that child as fast as possible, and one would circle the child, and one would come up to the child and lick the bloody knees and the bloody elbows and the tears off the face. And they just instinctually knew, here's one on guard and here's one taking care of the problem, just like they would in the pasture with the animals. They tend to be especially cognizant of the smaller, weaker, more helpless animals and people. So that means children and baby animals, they are just super sweet with. Yeah, we're kind of non-traditional as far as dogs go in the traditional dog breeding world because they are livestock guardians. So we have multiple pastures, and we have multiple outbuildings that are associated with those pastures. So, for example, we've got an area for our standard size bucks, an area for our miniature bucks, and then an area for our does that we rotate pastures on for those does too. And then we have a general perimeter around our property and around the house, which includes all of the rest of the livestock. And so we typically run dogs in the general perimeter area, and then we run dogs in each of the pasture areas. And that works really well for us to do that. And so we have housing via either lean-tos or barns that they can stay in each of those pastures with the animals. We also have a couple kennels that we use on our property. We don't use them, like around the clock or anything. But if, say, we're having a party or something, even though the dogs most dogs are typically safe around the kiddos, we still put them up because my kids know how to be respectful with dogs, but not all kids have been raised that way. Right. So we're just not going to put our dogs or our kids into situations that they aren't set up for success. So then they go into those, and those they're very simple structures. They consist of a sheltered area and a run. And then the third thing that we do for housing for our dogs is that we set up multiple crates in another area, and we crate train all of our dogs. We just feel like that's really important because you just never know, if somebody's going to be injured or somebody's going to be in heat or whatever, and you need to segregate that dog, and you don't want it to be another stressful situation. So we crate train all of our dogs as well.
Yeah, smart. Can you talk about the diet and the reason behind your philosophy with the diet?
Sure. Right now we are feeding mainly a kibble type diet. We typically top dress with some fish oils and some veggies, and occasionally some extra protein. We have considered looking into raw diets, and we know a lot of people that do that successfully, but that's not something that I feel I have enough expertise on at this point to do it in a way that is beneficial to my dogs. And so that's why we haven't moved in that direction. But we do see some benefits in that for sure. Yes, I'm feeding myself and my husband and our 6 kids, and we've got several herds of goats and probably close to 1,000 chickens and different poultry right now. Taking on that at this point is not something I feel like would be beneficial. So that's why we're not doing it. But I think there's definitely a middle ground. That is typically where most people can lie. So we do the same thing with we treat our dogs at the medical clinic for what they need at the medical clinic, but we do a lot at home because we also know, having livestock, we're used to treating things on our own. We have, a staple kit. We know how to do staples. We know how to give injections. We know how to do all of those things, but we also realize that there are times that they need to go to the doctor. We sometimes even use more homeopathic remedies, but we're always watching to make sure that if they need medical intervention, that they have that.
Mm-hmm. And have you run into any typical health issues with the Gamprs?
Mm-hmm. Typically our dogs, the only thing that we've really had is, just typical injuries that they get out in the pasture. We had a dog maybe 3 weeks ago that cut his leg open on a metal building.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's just kind of it's not really a health issue. It's just, one of those things that happens. And so we had to get him all tidied up. And that was another instance where I was so glad he was crate trained, because while he was okay with being in the pasture, the other dogs wanted to play with him, right. And that just kept tearing it open. And so he needs to be in the crate for a while. So, right. But what we see with these dogs is that generally, because of the landrace nature, they are pretty healthy dogs. Mm-hmm. We encourage, as a club, having the dogs embark tested. Mm-hmm. We've embark tested our dogs, and we know, for sure that they're not passing on any genetic disorders or any other undesirable traits that we don't want to pass on, because our breeding pool is so small at this point. Every litter, matters. I would say that the issues that we watch for as a club is that we've seen with some of our imports and some of the embark testing that some of the dogs have, cardiac issues, just a few. We've also seen that a few of the dogs, because we're getting dogs from the same area, or we're trying hard to not get them from the same area, but some people obtain dogs on their own and not through the club. Mm-hmm. They may have a higher inbreeding coefficient, and so we try really hard when we're helping people decide how to breed their dogs to try to match them or pair them with a dog that has a very low inbreeding coefficient. Mm-hmm. And then we've also seen a few instances, probably maybe in the 25 or 30% of dogs having one coefficient for the degenerative myopathy. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the high. I mean, 25 to 30% is not very high overall, but it's something that we obviously keep track of, and we try to help people that are breeding. Even though with one coefficient, they're not going to be, they're just in the carrier status. They're not going to have any issue with their life. We obviously want them to breed to a dog who has doesn't have any character traits for that. Mm-hmm. So.
Awesome.
So that's the basic of it. We really don't see too many issues of hip dysplasia. It happens occasionally. Mm-hmm. We encourage, when we're talking about doing testing, we encourage doing thyroids and cardiac, patella, those types of things. If you're going to go ahead and do your hips, you might as well do the other stuff while you're at it. So.
Right, exactly. Well, do you have any last words or anything that I didn't bring up that you'd want to talk about?
Well, I just think that these dogs are really just such a special breed, and I would encourage people just to look into them more because they're just kind of that rare jewel. I really foresee them becoming more and more popular as they become more well known. People are going to enjoy them and have them be part of their farm.
All right,
wonderful.
Perfect.
Thank you again.
All right, thank you.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.